There are a lot of messages about parenting out there. We're here to break it down and shrink it down for you.
On to Shrink the World.
Jay, I'm going to ask you some questions and pick your brain about your experience in parenting, and as well as your work as a therapist in dealing with parents and working with parents and treating parents with kids who are struggling in one form or another. I have a list of questions here.
Okay.
What do you think is the biggest problem facing kids in this day and age that parents can help with?
It's a really good question. And from a lot of parents I talk to, and I think even in my own experience as a parent, I think one of the biggest problems, or one of the biggest challenges that kids are facing today is the impact of technology, social media. And I think, parents sometimes struggle to navigate this new digital landscape with their kids. And I think they struggle to set healthy boundaries and foster open communication about the impact of technology and how to use it appropriately versus having it become an indulgence. So that's kind of where I gravitate, because technology and social media, they can be great resources on the one hand, but they also become, problematic in that they're avenues for things like cyberbullying, certain algorithms in social network sites, sometimes expose our kids to imagery and ideas and thoughts that can affect their identity development, their sense of self-esteem. So it's a lot. It's a lot of information that kids are exposed to that they may not be ready for, and it's available at their fingertips. So I guess my question for you might be, how do parents strike a balance between allowing their kids to engage in appropriate use of technology while also ensuring that they're going to have a healthy, well-rounded upbringing?
It's interesting. When I was talking to my kids about this podcast that we were going to do, my oldest child, 21-year-old, just about 21-year-old son, he said that the biggest issue, at least the first thing that came to his mind, was technology and about how important it is for parents to set rules and limitations and parameters. I don't know, he didn't use those big words, but except for rules, around the amount of time and how much of their day is focused or done on technology.
Yeah.
Whether it be video games, social media, etc. So that was the first thing he thought of. And that was interesting because that wasn't my first thing, but that's interesting because...
And it is interesting because he's of this generation. He's gone through childhood. He's now emerging into adulthood, and he reflects back and sees that as a major concern. And, I know your kid. He's an excellent sort of technologically minded kid. But at the same time, he has sounds like he has a little bit of insight into, potentially the pitfalls of, unabated or unregulated use of that technology.
Yeah.
Okay.
So to answer to more fully answer your question, and to go with what my son was saying, I do see this as a little bit of a problem at times, especially when it comes to behavioral issues, and including depression, anxiety, and behavioral as well, all the above, because it's kind of like the more time they spend on electronics, they become more irritable, and then communication in the family breaks down, and then exchanges between parents and children become more adversarial.
It's an excellent point, and I do think frustration tolerance is a big area of development. We have to be able to model emotional regulation. We have to be able to sort of set the stage for our kids to be able to experience that as well. And, the thing about social media and technology is it's instant gratification.
Mm-hmm.
You click a button, the thing that you're looking for is instantly available. Mm-hmm. And even when, say, maybe there's a breakdown in the Wi-Fi, or maybe the computer's taking a little extra time to load, it's like I know it from across the house because they're screaming, "This isn't happening fast enough."
Oh, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
My son does the same thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's not an uncommon thing for kids because the expectation
Right.
that we get what we want and it comes to us immediately.
Right. And I think a lot of parents have a hard time believing in their own authority to set parameters
Mm-hmm.
on how much time that their child does spend on their electronics, on their phone, on their Twitches, whatever you want to call it, and video games. And I think there's a feeling of helplessness in my experience in working with families where this is one of the symptoms. It's rarely the only symptom, but it's part of a behavioral issue that often comes up. They have a hard time exercising their authority. They think, well, I don't want to set too many limits. They're already having a hard time with certain areas of their life, certain other areas, and I think they just have a hard time as part of a bigger picture, which we'll get, I'm sure, into a lot in this podcast. That they have a hard time believing in their own authority to basically say, this is what we value, this is what we expect, and we make the rules. Respectfully, of course, but with rules.
Well, that's a really good point, and it kind of brings up the bigger overarching question: is what is our job as a parent? Yeah. What are we here to do?
Right.
And I don't know. What are your thoughts on the answer to that very fundamental question?
Well, the way I look at my role as a parent, first of all, let me say, I hear all the time in therapy as a therapist that parents really take a lot of value in being a good parent. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That word or that phrase comes up all the time.
Yeah. I think parents want to be good, but what does it mean to be good?
Right. And one of the things I tell them is, it's really usually in most situations, there are exceptions, but in most situations, it's not as complicated as they think. And I think a lot of the reason is because we get a lot of messages in our society about the importance of being a good parent. Do this, do that. You can't be too harsh. You can't be too soft. We're just getting a lot of mixed messages.
But what do we want to be able to? So even good parenting, that's such a comes down to values maybe. Right. But what is effective parenting? And I think that's raising resilient kids who can deal with adversity, who can persevere through hardship, and to become valuable contributing members of society. Yeah. So what does that look like, as kids are growing up? How does that get modeled? How does that value get conveyed? And that's allowing your kids to deal with a little bit of adversity, to exercise a little bit of patience when the thing is not moving as quickly as you might expect. You have to be a little bit more flexible and take a deep breath.
When people believe they can make it in the world on their own, if need be, or coupled up, there's a sense of relief. There's a sense of a weight being lifted off of most people's shoulders, because I think a lot of us have a hard time believing in, how am I going to do this? How am I going to be able to make it through? So when we prepare, our role, which goes back to answering your question about, our job is to prepare our children to make it in the world independently, where they can navigate through situations, and it'll be difficult often enough, and they'll grow from it. But that's our job, which goes back to your resilience.
Yeah,
statement.
and a big part of resilience is being able to not only persevere through adversity, but to be able to reflect on accomplishments and successes as well.
Mm-hmm.
So kids need to be set up to succeed every step of the way.
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean I'm going to give everything to you, because then they didn't have to work for it. And then they have nothing to reflect on,
Mhm.
as opposed to when you have to struggle a little bit to get that thing that you worked so hard for, then you believe in yourself.
Mhm.
You believe you're capable of taking on the next challenge, whatever it might be.
Mhm.
Parents not necessarily indulging in their kids and helping their kids to feel good all the time because it's such a bad thing that they experience a little discomfort. But to, in fact, allow some of that, to lean into some of that discomfort and help kids to realize that's just it's a part of everyday life.
Yeah, and I think a lot of parents, one of the biggest things, again, I experience in the role of a therapist when I work with parents,
Mhm.
is they have such a hard time sitting with their child's pain or emotional discomfort, and they feel like they have to do more, which is really
Over
a
functioning.
major, yeah.
Yeah.
And then that really robs a child of being able to learn how to problem solve.
And maybe it's really the parent's inability to deal with their own discomfort.
Mm.
You know, they look at the kid's discomfort as something they have to avoid because they struggle to deal with their own
Right.
so much of the time. So a lot of the parenting work we do is really individual therapy for the parents,
Yes.
helping them to become more skillful in their own lives so they can then transmit that to their
Mhm.
kids.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. In fact, this issue comes up pretty much at least every day,
Mhm.
every work day for me, where I'm trying to get the parents away or out of a child's relationship with themselves.
mhm.
Because we all have a relationship with ourselves in terms of how do we navigate through discomfort? How do we problem solve when when we're suffering in some way? And very often when parents can't struggle with dealing with their own discomfort, as you said, regarding their child's discomfort, they get in the middle of that relationship. And if you think about it, everyone who grows and learns how to problem solve and matures, we do it through figuring things out and making sense out of things on our own.
Yeah.
And when a parent gets out of the way by basically saying, listen, I'm here for you, but this is something you have to work through. I am a huge believer in consequences.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because there are expectations and things in order to help a child eventually become a self-sufficient, thriving adult. One of the things that we can do and have influence over is holding them accountable.
Yeah, personal
For everything.
responsibility.
Mhm.
If I do this, then this is what I can expect. It might feel like a punishment if I'm losing something that's important to me.
Mhm.
It might feel like a reward if I'm getting something.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
But stability and consistency.
Mhm.
Emotionally stable delivery of reasonable consequences,
Mhm.
and doing that each step of the way.
Mhm.
Each time I do this, this is what I can expect.
Okay, let's get a little personal.
Mm-hmm.
As a father yourself,
Yeah.
what do you find most challenging specifically about your role as an individual, as well as specifically regarding your particular family circumstances, if you don't, without getting too personal, of course.
I think in the interest of being authentic, to the people who are watching us, I think they want to see that we're humans and we have experiences of our own here. And yes, I'm a father of a soon-to-be teenager, and and when I look back, I've always thought, the one thing that I'm not going to get back is having more quality time. That is a finite resource, but it's one that we have to prioritize. So I think, juggling all these different responsibilities, having a career, having other interests that are outside of the house, and then also being present for my kids' key moments. I think it requires a lot of intentional effort. A lot of setting aside time.
You think you wrestle with that?
I think I do. When I have an opportunity to go out and hang out with friends, I think back, what am I missing out on at home? And now that my kid is a teenager and they're off making friends of their own, and they need less of that quality time with me as the parent because they're making more of that for themselves with their own peer group. I think it's both a good thing, but then I struggle with I missed out on that. I missed out on that opportunity to read a book together or play some games together. And so I get you ask me as a father, what do I find most challenging? It's being able to I guess deal with my own fear of missing out on opportunities to have a closer bond with my kid. I don't know. What do you struggle with, or what do you think about that kind of a struggle? Do you think it's ubiquitous, like a lot of parents might deal with some of that, or?
It's an excellent question. Yeah, I don't wrestle with that thing. You know me, so I'm not the most, with people who I know well. I'm not the most patient person, and I get frustrated, and I'm very critical. So that's my biggest Achilles heel. That's my biggest challenge, is to restrain myself, which is interesting because that's a theme that I go over with parents a lot. Restraining myself regarding, although my kids would say I don't, but I do. Probably because they know when I don't. But restraining myself in terms of, okay, what do I say in this situation if to avoid being too critical, while also expressing, having them know that, okay, this might not be okay. Yeah.
That's good. I think every parent should sit down and ask themselves this question. What are the biggest challenges I face?
Right.
What is it about me? What can I take accountability for? What can I do more effectively? And I think when you're having these sort of reflective moments, not just as a parent, but as a human being, you're going to be more effective in whatever you set out to do.
It's interesting to say that, because one of the things, I'll even mention this to my clients at times when it's applicable. Whenever I think about what I do, whenever I remember what I do for a living as a family therapist, I 100% of the time, when I try to think about what is the best approach to use in this situation, what's most effective, it always is beneficial. So it's kind of like the way I regulate myself. When I just let myself loose, and it's not just being funny, and it's not just humor loose, but regarding being critical or trying to correct things, it's not as effective as when I think about what to do, which is really an important thing as parenting. Given what we're talking
Deliberation.
about. Deliberations. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If there's one takeaway from this episode, it's
Yeah.
for parents to take that step back and deliberate.
Right. Think about, what does my kid need?
Yeah.
Because every kid has different strengths and deficits.
Yeah.
And to really think about your child, I always think about my kids' strengths and deficits because I'm trying to help them.
Yeah.
To think about each kid needs different things. So some kids might need more emotional regulation, and some kids might need more consequences. Some kids might need a little more humor and laid back approach. Some kids,
know your kid, know their
Right.
strengths, leverage those strengths.
Right.
Know your strengths, and see where there's a way to sort of dovetail that. So
Right.
my best self can access and engage with your best self.
Right. Exactly. So it becomes more about, what does my child need to mature and grow and be more resilient and cope, as opposed to what is it that I just feel like saying or what we're doing.
Yeah.
What do they
Because
need?
I'm in some kind of a mood right now. Yeah.
And what do they need doesn't mean what do they need to indulge, which often gets misinterpreted. I'm not a fan of indulging.
Well, that's more desire, right? What
Yes.
do I want? What do I long
Right.
for? Which
Right.
isn't something you necessarily
Right.
need.
Right. It's only a matter of, what do they need to grow, which is always about long-term stability as
Yeah.
opposed to short-term comfort.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, and there's many episodes that we could do on the detriment of pleasure seeking and operating according to the pleasure principle versus
Stay tuned for that episode.
the episode on the id.
Yes. In America.
Yeah, well,
We're a
exactly.
gluttonous country, but that's
Oh yeah, yeah.
Stay tuned on
If that's one of our deadly sins, and we
Mhm.
were guilty as charged,
Mhm.
collectively at least. As opposed to what would be the opposite of that?
Restricting?
Restraint, I think is the word you used.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right.
Minimal necessary. Keep it simple.
Right.
Um,
And
Yeah.
like you're using your word too, deliberate.
Deliberate.
Being deliberate, being intentional,
mhm.
thinking it through. I think in our society the biggest problem by far is a lack of self-regulation.
Mm.
From kids to
Mhm.
adults to sometimes even in business, everywhere.
Everywhere you look,
Drug abuse.
there's an opportunity for us to be more deliberate
Mhm.
and exercise a little bit of restraint and lean into the discomfort that comes with
Mhm.
not always having the answer.
Mhm. It's time to break for a word from our sponsor.
Okay, okay.
Our sponsor today is Boner Drill. If you're in the mood for some lovin', but also in need of catching up on some sleep, Boner Drill has your back. Guys, Boner Drill will keep you aroused while you sleep. You get the best of both worlds, pleasure and sleep. The makers of Benadryl and Viagra have teamed up to make couples happier and healthier. Who says you can't have it all? Ask your doctor about it. Boner Drill. Side effects may include perpetual smile on yours and your partner's face, but it could also include stroke and heart attack during sleep. Use wisely and as directed.
But my goodness, what will the pharmaceutical companies
They're
I
amazing.
mean, what are they going to think of
Right.
next? Jeez.
It's amazing what this pill can do.
There's a pill for everything in this country, and Americans they're asking their doctors, write that script for me, doc.
Mhm. I'm always telling couples, be more intimate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is the reason why we took this sponsor. Because
And I'm always telling people to make sure you're getting 6, 7, 8 hours of sleep each night. So yeah, if we have a medicine that can serve both of those purposes, why not? Why not?
So, one of the things I also think about is we're talking really about parenting in America. I wonder if other cultures have it, do it differently. Do you think that parenting in other cultures, whether it be Western or non-Western cultures, they don't have these same problems, or maybe even different problems, or what are your thoughts?
It's a really good question. And I suspect that there's definitely some differences between the way we do things and the way people, in other parts of the world do things. And I kind of think it might have a lot to do with, affluence in this country.
Mm-hmm.
That may be a big part of it. When we talk about indulgence, we talk about, I even see it, in some of the families I work with. Parents stressing over, do I get my kid a new car or a used car? Do I let my kid have, this brand new thing or that latest greatest, thing that costs hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars. So I definitely think in America there is a focus on consumerism, materialism, having things, and again back into the back to this idea of indulgence. I think we do a lot more of that in this country than in other countries because of the access to resources that we broadly have in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts about that? What sort of cultural elements are you seeing, either in your work or just in your daily observations?
The biggest issue between, so this is less to do necessarily with cultural differences within the United States as opposed to differences between the United States and other countries when they're living. This is what I anecdotally have perceived or assessed, that in the United States there's so much of a deferring. I think that's a word you used before. Deferring to kids as leaders in the family. There's almost like a reverse hierarchy
Okay.
that occurs in the United States that is very detrimental because children can't handle all that responsibility for the burdens of the family, whether it be athletic or academic or
Parentification,
yeah.
a little bit of that. I see in fact, a lot of that in my work with families.
Parentification is definitely one major area. Another major area is we want to make sure our kids are okay with our decisions as parents. So many parents wrestle with that.
Okay, so there must be consensus
Yes.
between all parties,
That's
even
exactly
the ones who really don't have that authority or even the capacity to make a well thought out decision
That's
in
right.
terms of what's going to be good for them.
Yep.
They haven't lived enough years to be able to make that
That's
decision.
exactly right.
And yet we give them, veto power. And
Exactly.
we give them an equal vote,
Yes.
recognition at the table.
Right. And I think as children get older, of course, I think they're saying things as they become teenagers, and there should be some. They should have at least some of the times, if not most of the time, some form of say in things. But to have that, as you put it, veto power, it is, especially when they're young, it's a reverse hierarchy, and hierarchies help a family remain stable.
Yes.
And in other cultures, from what I've seen, even though it seems like it might be going in that direction, because America exports a lot of things, including values, but I still see it as in other cultures, it's less. The hierarchy is still a little bit intact. I know that in France, it's not as.
Mm-hmm. Well, you see, even in some Eastern societies, you have filial piety, where we respect our elders, our ancestors as having wisdom. We defer to them, we listen to them, because we're younger and we don't have the cumulative knowledge that our elders have. So I feel like we've lost some of that, and I don't know if that comes down to a disintegration of the family unit or any other number of things, just a disconnect.
Yeah.
We're so digital, we don't come together and listen and have story time and these more traditional sorts of ways of gathering, I think, in this country.
Makes sense.
And maybe that contributes to some of this sort of reversing of the hierarchy.
Yeah, I didn't think about this until now, to what you were talking about. I don't know if you mentioned Eastern cultures or.
Yeah, sure.
It's almost like, I see it as almost like the exact opposite problem. Maybe not in all, but many, from what I've seen, just in my own personal life, from friends, kids' friends, etc., that there can be too strong of a hierarchy, especially given our society and how democratic it is. There's too strong of a hierarchy where the parents are like they're rulers and the kids are just servants.
It's authoritarian.
Yes.
And then, the kids aren't able to even find their voice.
Right.
So I think the happy medium there, I used to work in corporate America for a brief stint, and, one of my managers told me, look, we want to know what you think. Your opinion is valuable. We're going to take it under consideration. But ultimately, when management or leadership makes a decision, the expectation is that, everyone supports it.
That's exactly right.
So it's not that kids should be seen and not heard. No, kids should be heard.
Right.
And they should know that their voice is taken seriously and appreciated. But ultimately, the parents have the sole decision. It's not a democracy.
It's not a democracy. It's interesting. And one of the things, this may seem kind of contradictory to my belief about the importance of a strong hierarchy or in the family, but I also think that parents, and I also talk about this in family therapy sometimes, I think that parents don't ask, maybe not all, a lot of parents don't ask questions of their children. Meaning, like, even questions as far as, like, what do you think of this? Not questions like, well, what should we do? in terms of leadership, but more like,
Oh,
what do you think
yeah.
about
Let
this?
me solicit some feedback from you, because that may actually influence my decision. It
Yes.
doesn't mean I'm going to defer to you, but it means that your input is valuable to me.
Yes, and to encourage them to think things through,
Yes.
as opposed to coming at it from authoritarian. No, we're just going to do this and that's it.
Problem
versus-
solving, right?
Yes,
This is teaching
that's
problem
exactly
solving
right.
skills.
Yes.
Another one of our important jobs.
That's exactly right. So there's I ask, well, you mentioned this, that you ask a lot of questions. That's probably something that a lot of therapists have in common. I ask a lot of questions in my not just as a therapist, although
That's
that
how
included.
we come up with our formulations.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I ask tons of questions to the point where it could be annoying for some people to hang out with, and family members. But
Well, it's challenging though,
yeah,
and sometimes it pushes people into a state of discomfort.
yes,
It's
I've
like,
had
oh,
that.
I've not thought of that. So,
Right.
so you mean I got to think about that and give you a well-formulated response? Oh,
and
geez, that's
sometimes
hard.
it gets misinterpreted as being critical,
Hmm.
when I'm really trying to have people think either about themselves or about a situation. So to ask kids questions like, well, what do you think what do you think you could do in this situation, or if this happened to you, what would you do? Asking them about their thought patterns, their thought. My daughter, I just thought of this. My daughter said, I also have a daughter, 16 years old, and whenever I ask her a question, she's like, "Dad, you ask a lot of questions." And I'm like, "Yeah, but that's
Oh,
how I
you've
get you to
noticed?
think."
What is she? And that might inspire you to ask another question. What do you think about all these questions I'm asking you? How does that impact you?
Right. So that's a really important way to get a child to problem solve. Like you were
Well,
saying.
what it does is it models curiosity.
Yes.
You ask questions because you're curious. You
Yes.
want to know the answer. You want to know the deeper level of things. And
Right.
I think when you do that, it teaches kids to be a little bit more maybe introspective or a little bit more intrigued about the world around them rather than just taking things for granted.
That's exactly right. So bringing this all together, after you've asked your kids questions and you deliberate over it within yourself after you ask questions, very importantly, you're in charge as parents.
Yeah.
Children follow parents' lead. It's really, really important that you're in charge. Get your kids' input, like you were saying, Jason, and hear what they have to say. They have interesting thoughts, but don't defer your decision because you've lived life. They haven't. Well, a little bit, but not much. You know better than they do about what's going on, especially after you get input, after you get their sense of, hearing what they have to say, and then coming up with okay, I hear that, and then you come up with a decision that's yours and your spouse's.
So how do you deal with an emotionally violent reaction to the word no? We're not going to do that. And then you're going to get pushback sometimes, especially from the younger kids who don't know how to tolerate not getting what they want.
So when you're saying how do you deal with it, meaning logistically, or how do you deal with it emotionally?
Well, I think both. I think
Okay.
that we got two processes happening
Yes.
simultaneously.
So the no is irrelevant, and you have to know that as far as logistically. But you don't necessarily. Well, all right, I'll leave that for in a minute. But as far as if they're saying no, it's really important. It's a good question. It's really important that you don't go back and forth with your child about, well, this is why, and then it gets to be a debate, and which goes back to
Right, then
You're the
it's
leader.
undermining the whole
Exactly.
the whole process there.
So
and you're
some-
giving up your power.
yes, it's exactly right. So sometimes it's really a matter of one of the things I'll say to my kids sometimes. Either you're going to do it or I'm going to do it, but it's going to get done. So you can choose whichever way you want to do this, and it's up to you. So you take away the control. It's really important to avoid a power struggle.
Yeah, and to, as you say, if you've deliberated
Yes.
and you've made a value-based decision after you've considered all of the
With your spouse.
the options there, and you're on the same page as your spouse, then yeah, you can be declarative and you can stick with no. You can be a broken record and say no. Your kid can ask you, 10 different ways. You can keep asking the question in multiple different ways, but I'm going to give you the same answer each and every time.
And I wouldn't even indulge giving an answer.
If no is the answer, that's
Right.
what you're going to get each and every time.
Right. Oh, you mean no from the parent, or?
Well, if I'm saying no to you, that was kind of the premise of the question. It's
Oh.
like when I say no, you ask me for something and I say no, we're not going to do that.
I misunderstood your question. I thought you meant when the child says no.
Well, if they say no to a demand that you make.
Oh, yeah, that's what you meant, right?
Or if I say, I guess really what it comes down to is that there's disagreement.
Okay.
You've laid down the law,
Mhm.
essentially. You've made a directive,
Mhm.
and your kid is in disagreement and they're trying to fight you against it.
Mhm.
They're saying no to you. They're saying no to your no.
Oh, so if they're saying
Yeah.
so if they're saying no to mine, and also consequences, like, well, listen, and again, all of this is calm but stern.
Mm-hmm.
You can do this or not do this. It's totally up to you. Here's what's going to happen if you do it, and here's what's going to happen if you don't. Your choice.
Yeah.
But you want to make the consequences very uncomfortable, emotionally, like psychologically, not physically, of course.
Well, yeah, it has to be relevant,
Mm-hmm.
to the situation. They have to know clearly what they stand to lose.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think, what they end up losing, sure, it's only going to be a salient consequence if it does produce some discomfort and it's
Mhm.
something that
That's
they want to
exactly right.
avoid doing. I don't like the thought of that, so I'm going to, comply.
Right.
um,
Without consequences,
yeah.
there's no leverage. And
Mhm.
so I want to say that this is really important, because I say this to a lot of my clients. If you don't use your power as parents, you have no power. It's really important to know what your power is and to utilize it in situations if your child is not compliant
Mhm.
with what you expect from them to do.
Mhm.
It's so many times parents, they know they can do certain things, but they choose not to do it because they don't want to make their kids too uncomfortable. They're afraid of being mean parents. They're afraid of not being a good parent. If their child's upset, they're not a good
Well, again,
parent.
this comes down to sheltering your kids from adversity, and this is a world full of adversity. It's not an easy world,
Mhm.
And if kids are not prepared to deal with that, in their own homes,
Mhm.
how are they going to be expected to deal with that in
That's
the
right.
outside world?
That's
It's going to be a lot less forgiving.
Mhm.
So we are, in a sense, preparing our kids for what's to come.
Mhm.
Um,
Some kids will be pretty compliant, and you don't have to use that much leverage. The large majority of kids, you have to use at least some, if
Mhm.
not a lot of leverage, and a use of power and go through via consequences.
Behavioral parenting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But also keeping it positive, not telling kids what they shouldn't do, although there should be some parameters, and I think kids need to be clear on what they ought to not be doing, but the focus is more on what to do instead. And that's the problem with a lot of punishments, is they teach kids what not to do, but they don't necessarily get into, here's what you can do instead, here's what's expected of you, here's what we can gravitate toward. Not so much don't do that, but do this.
Well, what are your thoughts on this? This is unacceptable. Doing this is unacceptable.
What does unacceptable mean?
It's not what we do. It's not how we live.
Why not? Why don't we do that? Why don't we live? Say I'm the kid and I'm asking you this because I want to know. What's wrong with doing that?
Well, then it depends on the situation. Then I would share with them it's not healthy, because if this happens, then
These are the actual real world consequences
Right.
that come with doing it
Exactly.
that way. That's why we don't
Right.
do it this way.
And one of the things here's a skill to use. I wouldn't feel good about myself as a dad
Mm.
if I let you do this, or if I didn't do this, or if this didn't happen.
Mm.
I just wouldn't feel good about myself. No one can argue against that. They could try, but like, well, you can feel good about myself. I just can't.
Yeah.
I wish I could, but I can't.
So what that communicates is that I think we have to, exercise our best judgment and
Mhm.
our intuition and adhere to our own value system when we go against that. And then we can have a talk about values or strengths or
Mhm.
why this is important.
Mhm.
to behave in this sort of way.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a place for, not necessarily yielding to your kids on these matters, but having it be an opportunity for rich discussion about, underlying.
If they're curious.
If they're curious.
In my experience.
But if they're asking the question, hopefully that's your leverage. Well, why? That's the question of why is usually born out of curiosity. Well, you really want to know? Here, I'll tell you.
It's not my experience.
No?
No, not with kids. I
Well,
mean, if you and I ask a question, why? That's out of
But
curiosity.
what's the tone of the word why? Why?
Right.
As opposed, why?
Yeah, but if kids, 9 out of 10 kids, if not more, 9.5, if they ask why when they're told to do something that they don't want to do, they're not curious.
I would tend to agree with that, especially the younger ones.
Right.
They're asking why because they're looking for an opportunity to undermine you.
Right.
But if you really want to know why,
Right.
you're looking for opportunities to kind of have an insightful.
Yes, absolutely. If kids are
well-reasoned
curious,
conversation.
of course.
Yeah.
Exploring things is a beautiful process.
But I agree with you. You don't try to reason with your kids at that level if they're not receptive to it.
No.
And that's where you just set the boundary.
Right.
No is no.
Right.
We're not going to discuss it right now. You asked. Here's the answer.
And I'll even say, I've done this with my kids. If you're genuinely curious, I'll explain it to you. Are you genuinely curious, or are you gonna, or
I like
just,
that.
you're just gonna figure it out? It's almost like meta communication.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah. It's therapeutic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I say, being a therapist. I don't know how people do this without being a therapist, which is the reason why we're here.
Yeah, I mean, I struggled enough. I went to school and learned about behavioral this and that, and and until you actually experience it yourself, it's like, it's the biggest challenge, the biggest undertaking of most adults. Is this role of the parent. I think this is a world where things are changing rapidly. And there's definitely an intersection between technological advancement, cultural advancement, and what happens in the home. With parenting styles and raising children. So ultimately, what do we need to do to be successful in our jobs, bringing up this future generation?
Chores, this gets talked about a lot. Having kids having chores is very important because that helps them feel like they're doing something as part of the family, that they're contributing to the family, and rather than just thinking about themselves. And it pushes them to do things that they don't feel comfortable doing, but they know that they're helping out the community as a
Citizenship.
Yep.
Being active, taking pride in what you do, and then being able to reflect on the accomplishments. So kids need to be able to feel that sense of accomplishment to develop self-esteem. So I think chores can do that. And you don't even necessarily have to give an allowance, although that would be a nice thing, especially early on. But when kids see the value of what they do, the intrinsic value of their contributions to whether it be their household or their broader community, then they grow up to become, again, engaged citizens, and that's kind of what we need more of.
Yeah. And even as they become young adults, like very young adults, and if they go to college, it's important to hold them accountable for getting good grades. Whatever those grades are in your family, that's up to you.
Set the expectation.
That's right, especially if you're paying for that. If
Yeah.
you're paying for that school, I guess you're not paying for the school, it really that's on them fully. But if you're investing, because that's
It's an investment. Absolutely.
and if they're not pulling their weight in that investment, then no parent should feel obliged or obligated to continue spending tens of thousands of dollars when a child is not.
In that case, sometimes the best thing for them would be, hey, listen, you're gonna take some time off of school. You're gonna go get a job,
Right.
and you're gonna retake those classes, and you're gonna pay for those classes.
Right.
And when you can demonstrate to me that you're back on track, I'll continue to support you. And that allows kids to have skin in the game, which is very important. Very important part of accountability. I did this. This is what I need to do. to make it right, because it's my life.
On that note, we just shrunk the world
Yeah,
in
yeah.
parenting.
Absolutely. So we thank you for joining us, and if you have any additional questions about what we've shared or about parenting in general, or maybe there's some other topics that you want us to discuss in greater detail, feel free to let us know in the comments section. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more of us in future episodes.
That's right.
Thank you.
All right. Good job. That's good.
We got a lot.
You'll be a lot. You're gonna have your work cut out for you with splicing.